if you have a customer that is like consistently finding bugs, like if you need a quality person, try to go recruit whoever's breaking your software. But
And once again, welcome to the Digital Customer Success Podcast. I'm Alex Turkovich. I'm so glad you could join us here today and every week as I seek out and interview leaders and practitioners who are innovating and building great scale CS programs. My goal is to self-educate and bring you along for the ride so that you get the insights that you need to evolve your own digital customer success program. If you want more info or you need to get in touch or sign up to get the latest updates from us, go to digitalcustomersuccess.com. But for now, let's get started with today's show. And welcome to episode 13 of the Digital CS Podcast. It's so nice to have you back. This week, I got a chance to sit down with Jen Jackson, who is a customer experience leader at Litmos currently. So she spends a lot of her day focusing on education technology and its place in the world. Jen has a ton of experience post-sale, specifically in support roles, brings that expertise to her role at Litmos and also to us here in this episode, where we spent a lot of time talking through what she's doing to build out her digital motions at Litmos, and also how her customers are integrating education technology into their own digital flows. We talk a little bit about microlearning and how that can be a part of a digital learning and performance support strategy. We talk a little bit about career progression and how support has essentially become the new mailroom as a starting point for growing within a company. And we spend a little bit of time talking about data and utilizing data for insights. Specifically, she has some really good insights into scoring off of support metrics. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jen Jackson. I know I sure did. This is, for those of you listening, this is going to be our second/third attempt at recording this due to technical difficulties. So hopefully we'll get through an entire episode this time. I wanted to welcome to the podcast Jen Jackson, who is a fellow Texan, based not too far from the Austin area. I'm in the Austin area, so we're enjoying the summer heat at the moment. Jen, you've got a long history in post-sales roles, and we're going to get into all of that. I'm excited to have you on the podcast because you're currently SVP of Global Customer Experience at Litmos. So you're kind of combining, the best of kind of two of my passions, which is, customer experience and also customer education. So I'm really excited to get into the weeds with you on those things. But first, Jen, welcome to the podcast. Would love for you to give us a little bit of your background, your CS origin story, and tell us a bit more about yourself.
yeah, absolutely. I always like to start with I grew up in the contact center, and I realized that I like solving problems for people and talking to people. So that kind of morphed into this career, and definitely older than customer success as a name, not a practice. And really, really excited about digital customer success. I think I'm a little bit of a nerd, so bringing in systems to help us do a lot of the proactivity and help drive some of the same outcomes is really exciting to me.
Yeah, go figure. We actually use the systems around us to help us out, right?
Yeah, that's crazy talk. Yeah.
Exactly. Now I mentioned you're a fellow Texan. You're actually a native Texan, which I think is a rarity these days, correct?
I am. So in other states, they use terms like unicorn, but in Texas, we use armadillos. So yeah, I'm an armored opossum, which is an armadillo. So born and raised.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And you said you kind of grew up in the context center. Talk to us a little bit more about that and what kind of roles you had there, and then also kind of how those inform your life today and your role today.
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate enough that when Mr. Michael Dell started building in Round Rock,
Yeah.
a bunch of us high schoolers kind of got scooped up to try some programs. And so I got to do a little bit of an internship on the support floor, and then I liked it. And so I ended up coming back to it after school. So I was a tier one agent, worked in their consumer and in their business. And so I got the challenge of helping, folks find the power button and understanding that the mouse is actually not the thing the cat chases, but it has buttons on it and all those kind of things. And, also the working with the IT veteran who'd been doing it longer than I'd been alive and was really shocked to hear a female voice on the other end of the line. So
Oh
it was
yeah.
a huge learning curve. But I will tell you that I think my approach to solving problems and everything that I kind of use to tackle problems probably stems most from those times because there's no screen sharing. There's no going to the house. It's you and this person on the phone, and we can either work against each other and build a wall between us, or we can work with each other and end up, virtually shoulder to shoulder tackling the problem together. So I had to get really creative when trying to solve things with no eyes virtually.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, I'm sure. I too spent a short stint a short 5 year stint at Dell, not in contact center and not in support, but it's staggering how many people knew that I worked at Dell thought that I could solve their computer problems.
Oh, absolutely. Like when we started the contact center and kind of transition to India, I went to India
Mm,
and spent quite a bit of time there. And like the transition from the mentality that like you work at Dell, you must know all the answers kind of in
right.
the US to going to India, or they're like, this is very exciting. And, it's a very, at the time was a very like sought after role, and people were really kind of enamored by just a much different culture. But I was fortunate to get to learn and everything that I could in the center, and then in India help cascade that and help build out some of the centers. So I consider myself really fortunate. I was at Dell at the right time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's great. We alluded to it a little bit, or you alluded to it a little bit in your kind of introduction, I will say, about how what digital customer success really is. And I like to ask all of my guests, what their definition of digital CS is. And you spoke a little bit already about, actually utilizing our tools to make the folks we have on the team a little bit more efficient and driving efficiency. And I love that you're focused on the internal answer first, but would love kind of you expand a little bit on that and tell us, in your own words, what is your definition of digital CS?
Well, I think I start from a place of what are the most meaningful engagements in the relationship and life cycle of a customer, and what are the things that absolutely need to be engaged by a human, driven by a human, and then
Mm,
what are the things that we can supplement the experience with strong technology to potentially deliver the same outcomes. Like, do I need a CSM to send an email, or can I use a tool like Gainsight to do a lot of proactive notification, studying of use cases, things like that? And can I use those programs so that the times that we are spending with customer are the most meaningful and the biggest bang for the buck and the value? And I always come back to it when I think of myself as a consumer. Very rarely do I have an hour to give to a vendor.
yeah,
More than likely, I have 30 minutes to give to a vendor. And if they only get, we've got uh, introductions and closure, right? So when you get down to it, you probably have 20 minutes at most. Like, what are the most important things you're going to tell me in those 20 minutes that you couldn't have delivered in any other way? And so when I approach it, I think of it very supplementary, very assistant, like how can we enhance the experience? And I think with the tools that we have today and with the evolution of AI and all of the things that we are doing to help digitally, I just think we can make things so much better. So I think for me, it's just the next logical step in the experience.
right. I love what you said about really making those live encounters that you have with your customer. I won't say in person because what is in person these days, but that like the actual encounters you have with your customer, making them as valuable as possible. So you're not wasting time on the fluff. You're actually, using the information that you've gleaned from the customer in a productive way and making them feel seen and heard.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Human to human is much different than what it probably was a couple years ago, but I think we promote very much a remote culture. And so I love that we can do that with our customers and still provide the value.
Right.
And I mean, it's not just proactivity, but it's also furthering of education. Like, part of the things that we're taking into our digital experiences isn't just how do I ensure you're realizing value, aware of changes, but how can I educate you and how can I help you educate who you need to, whether internal, because a lot of times with SaaS, it's B2B with a C somewhere in that, right? Whether it's an internal customer or an external customer. So it acts very much like B2B to C. So I'm always thinking not only what can we do to help you as an organization reach that value, but how do we help you cascade that beyond? Because very often there is a beyond, right?
Yes. Why? I hope there's a beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this, you were at Pulse this year as I think both a vendor and just an observer, if you will. And I know this year Pulse was very, very focused on digital, where in past years it's been a little bit more focused on, CSM efficacy and those kinds of things. And I was curious what your kind of takeaways were from attending Pulse, maybe both as an observer and a vendor.
Yeah, so I love Pulse. I have tried to go to every single one that I can go to, and I think I've been to a significant amount of them.
Mm,
Obviously, none of us went the year of the
no.
plague beginning, but um, my two takeaways were definitely leaning more into digital to help me scale and to scale at the rate I need to facilitate the growth. The other part is the utilization of AI, not as a replacement, but always as a supplement. How can I do more? In my mind, it's how can I use the information available to me to do better, to know our customers better, to understand their use case and make suggestions or features or recommendations that align with where their business is going. How can I enable that CSM to have the most amount of information available to them with ease so that they can make the most out of those interactions and they can know what they're talking about and things like that. And so,
Mm,
really in my strategy and kind of what I'm doing for planning this year with rolling into a new digital program, I'm looking a lot at what can we do with the data available to us. And I think probably I might have been thinking about that prior to Pulse, but not to the extent I am now. So for
yeah.
me, those were probably the biggest takeaways.
It's cemented. It's almost like validation in a way. Like, hey, we've been dabbling in this stuff for a few years now, and everybody kind of like it's kind of like a line in the sand has been drawn. It's like, oh, okay, we got to go do this now for sure. For sure. You are currently at Litmos. I think in our previous chats, one of the things we have in common is that um, you know I've implemented Litmos before in a previous professional life. You did some Litmos implementations before. You actually used those Litmos implementations to get you a gig, which I am envious of. Um, but so you're at Litmos, which is a great LMS for those of you who are listening. A lot of cool kind of customer education features and whatnot. But I'd love to know, what are you doing currently to build out your digital programs at Litmos, and also maybe how are your customers using Litmos as part of their digital engagements as well?
Yeah, I think so. I am a former customer, so I do think that puts me at a greater advantage because as a customer leader, I not only need to be responsible for making sure my internal teams are moving as fast as engineering and product, understand what's coming, training, onboarding, those types of things, but our customers as well. And
Mm,
so that's why I brought it into my organizations in the past. What I'm doing differently here as I'm building it into the digital experience, meaning, you don't have to attend a webinar, a group training, schedule something like that. I'm really trying to bring the training into, oh, hey, this trial was great. Now I want to extend this. Let's say I've purchased it, whether it's like an e-commerce model or, either way, right? The two models you have, either a salesperson is selling it to you or you're clicking through one of the two.
yeah, right.
But what I want is as a part of the the purchase process or whatever that is, let's just focus on like an e-commerce model. Let's say I built this magical machine where you did a trial, it was amazing. You want to just turn that into a purchase. What I want is for as a part of our learning system to say like, okay, here are the how do I get started, what are the first three things I need to do, how do I do this, and like step through with the education and the content right there as a part of your process. So I'm not going to a different screen, I'm not going somewhere else, I'm not signing up for 6 hours of training. Very manageable, very kind of micro experience. Give me what I need to keep moving on the path to get to where I need to solve the problem.
Mm.
And, as I'm moving further into it, tell me about content or training that I can take, whether it be, collateral that I could read through really quick, a 2 minute video, something like that. And so we're really focusing on what I categorize as micro trainings. How can I learn on the fly while trying to solve a task? And yes, we still offer like, traditional, you can kind of pop out and say, hey, I want to take, an in person training, or I want to do like some group sessions. But when I'm thinking about the way people work today, we've got remote workers, we've got deskless workers, we've got people who are moving on the fly, all different verticals. Everybody uses training in some capacity, whether it's compliance or regulations for their vertical and things like that. And so I'm trying to think with our evolving workforce, how do we take continuing education and critical education and build it into the workflow versus making a separate stream? And so in talking to some of our customers, this is really attractive to them because not only are we remote, but our customers are making that transition or have made the transition, and they're trying to figure out how to keep, in compliance for security and, regulatory things for healthcare. And, let's just think about nurses. We know that nurses are always taking continuing education. That is a
Yeah.
part of their career. So how do we work with them?
Micro learning. I dig that. As a former, I guess, once a learning nerd, always a learning nerd. But I spent a long kind of period of my career in learning and development. And it was always the focus, was always on your e-learning modules and your instructor-led modules and those kinds of things. And it started kind of morphing into, let's make our content more modular and
Mm-hmm.
smaller and bite size. And I love where you're going with it in terms of like making it even smaller, even more digestible, and part of that natural digital journey to where it doesn't really maybe it doesn't even feel like you're learning. You're just it's learning combined with performance support, maybe something like that. But I love that.
Well, think about it from this perspective. In this generation, this age, a lot of us have or do play video games. What happens when you get to kind of next level? They don't pull you out and do a whole new tutorial. Like when
Yeah.
you come up to that action, they're like, hey, press up if you want to jump. Press, you get it in the motion in that. They're not pulling you out to do a tutorial. And kind of in my mind, I'm thinking about it like that. So if I'm going to perform an action, it's a new action. I've never been here before. Why not walk me through it as a part of it versus, saying, hey, you can't proceed until you go complete this, whatever the course looks like. And so I think that's kind of the mentality that I'm trying to bring into how we do things. Because me, I will tell you, I am a very hands on. I want to understand my technology, I want to dig into it. And if the answer to solving for something is have to go watch a 45-minute video, I will never watch the
I'm not
45
going to
minute
do
video.
it. I don't
Yeah,
know anyone who will.
yeah. And so if you, however, have a pop-up or like a 15-second video that's like, go here, do this. If you need more information, go here. I am all in on that. And I think most people are.
I think so too, and I do think that there are a lot of orgs that are focused on things like that, like your in product, guides and those kinds of things that kind of have been a staple in SaaS for quite some time. But they're also focused, on email campaigns and those kinds of things as well. But I do feel like there's probably some missed opportunity that you have insight to with regards to the utilization of ed tech in digital. Are there some specifics that you can kind of point to where you're often like looking at other platforms and how they're doing it and wishing that they were doing something different, or some utilization of ed tech in a way that most people just don't really think about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a good conversation when I was at Pulse. I love like the roundtables when they kind of bring people together, and the passing periods where we're all just like randomly sitting at tables talking. And the one thing that stands out to me is I don't think that people consider ed tech or continuing education or knowledge as a critical part of the business. I think very often it's classified as, oh, that's the system we take security. Oh, that's the system we take our HIPAA training. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and people don't lean into the actual, and I mean, you could say this about all softwares, but people don't realize the actual value of ed tech type systems. I mean, you can take your ed tech system, pull it into your onboarding, attach it to your HR system, and it tracks all of your training, your skills, your career pathing, all of that. Like I use it twofold. One for making sure that we all have the knowledge we need, but the second layer internally is that I use it for skill set tracking and evolution of the development of the folks in our organization. So for me, it's a critical, right? I have way too many people in my organization to be able to track it myself at a granular level. And very often I have two levels of leaders. One's focused on the day-to-day, one's focused on kind of a little bit higher level. And so having a system that can do that when we get to that time where we're looking at growth, we're looking at performance, things like that, like I probably said 10 million times, I consider it critical, because it does that for us. And I don't think people know enough about that. I think, like I said, it gets simplified as just the compliance system. And so what I always like to tell leaders is, if your organization has an ed tech program, a Litmos, an LMS, whatever you call it, get with whoever owns it and see what other kind of potential it has, because more often than not, the software you're searching for, your organization already possesses. You just don't realize that you can do that. And so I generally encourage leaders, if you don't have the time, but if you have an operations person or even a leader that's a little bit more on the tech savvy, go get exploratory with the software that you have, because you can probably bring in a lot of um, benefits. I was going to say bonus and benefits together. I think I'm creating words.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
Benefits. I like it.
yeah, but you can use it for yourself and you can use it for your customers. And so for me, I think it's kind of like a win-win. And it's changing the mindset and changing the culture of not only using it for like your must have, but creating that culture of learning. We all say when we're hiring, we want people who are curious. We want learners. Curious is another way for, to say basically learning. And so when you bring people in that are curious, you need to have a system that is helping them expand their knowledge and learn. And I think that's where ed tech comes in.
I couldn't have said that better myself. I do think that the internal enablement element is so often overlooked, where we spend time building out modules and flows and all that kind of fun stuff for our customers, but we don't necessarily put our internal folks through that, and nor do we maybe educate them on some of the things that we are doing that are customer facing. And so folks will get surprised on a QBR that something is the way it is or something like that. So you see that
You
a
know what
lot.
I think? I think because I come from, like, I say my I cut my teeth in support. I
Mhm.
think there's sometimes in old contact centers of past days there was that mentality of just being in support, like it's just a support job. There's no like next steps, and I've always thought that in the 50s or 60s you would start in the mailroom and you would get to know the company and the process and the product. And that's how, mail folks would go from the mailroom to executive leadership. And to me, I think tech support today, the support organizations, the service organizations are like that for companies. And so I probably focus a lot to make sure that everybody in the customer organization, from services to success to support, knows the value of them in the business and knows that they have next steps and that we're actively working to create that next step. And for me, ed tech is what does that. I'm able to say, hey, listen, here are the skill sets. what are some things that you're interested in? We can go this way or that way. And for digital CX, it's even more critical because we're bringing in folks who are supporting a large subset of customers in a one to many. And so for them to feel valued in the organization and not just a cog in the wheel, having that next step to say, okay, you can go from a CSM or, a digital CX person to an S&B CSM, or, you can move into services, you can go into support. This is how these skills map out so that people feel engaged and are really, interested in caring for their large book of business. And still recognizing that we're growing their skill set so that they have long-term potential, I think is honestly critical, especially today.
Actual career progression and a path to get to your next role? No way.
Yeah, I know. It's we're doing innovative things over here.
That's right. um, Speaking of kind of innovation, we all get examples of people who do cool stuff, and we like to highlight cool stuff, and we like to highlight things that have gone well. And there, there's been a lot of examples of that over the last few months, especially as there's been a hyper focus on digital. But I'd like to highlight maybe some things that people, orgs don't do well on occasion, because you learn almost as much from those instances as well. And I'm curious, what are some blunders that you see um, happen when folks are trying to get their digital motions up and running? And I'm sure you've seen some of this among your own customer base when they're trying to implement ed tech and into their orgs, and even customer facing stuff. What are some typical blunders that you've run across there?
I think we think digital CX and we think, oh, wonderful, this is going to be an operational savings. It's going to be a replacement
Mm,
to my staffing needs. And when you come at it from that perspective, you're solely focusing on the economical benefits of you, the organization, but you're not thinking about the customer experience. And so I always I guess I have like a footnote. Yes, as leaders of customer organizations, we are always thinking efficiencies, economics. How can we do more with less? How can we get better? But I think the blunder is thinking of it as a replacement, much like people get really excited about AI as a replacement when really it's a supplemental, it's an enhancement, it's a how do I make
cool.
this better? Right, exactly. And I think what I know I've seen, and to some extent I've done it even myself, is coming at it from that side instead of starting with, okay, what's the experience? What do we want the experience? Let's define the outcomes that we want, and then let's kind of work backwards a little bit. And yes, there's going to be some economical benefit, but that can't be where you start, or you're going to miss the most important part, which is the customer. And so, at the end of the day, our job is to service and care, retain, and grow our customers. And so we have to kind of come at it from a different perspective versus just budget. I would say the other part is not collaborating both internally within their business. Marketing generally has presence in SDR and BDR and, chat and things like that. And so chat bots. And so to some extent, they have a little bit of a digital experience already built in. And so I found great partnerships with CMOs that I've worked in the past, and kind of just understanding what that digital engagement looks like with customers, things to stay away from. You don't want to overscript. You don't want to overcomplicate. If somebody has to go through 7 steps to do a thing, they're probably not going to do the thing, right? And so we have to think about that when we're thinking about what we're asking our customer to do, what their experience looks like. And then, kind of like I said earlier, you need to define your outcomes. What do you want this experience to be for them? Is it proactivity and understanding about features coming? Is it, solving a certain amount of problems on their own and making it simple? You really have to approach it from that. And then I would say, and I say this for every new thing that comes out, there are so many different people who have tried and exactly what you said, failed and been successful at digital. I love when I see on LinkedIn customers or, peers or connections in my network saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Has anybody tried it? And if you ever read the comments, like, it is the most beneficial I have
Mhm.
ever, like, it is my go-to. Like, I'll search for a question on LinkedIn. Somebody's probably already asked it, and just reading through the comments, it's an incredible wealth of knowledge. And I would say, like, I think we get so much in our heads trying to solve a problem, we forget that other people have done this too. And we should ask that question out loud.
It's so true. I mean, when you really think about it, LinkedIn is a giant knowledge base of, of things that have been done before in kind of people trying to do what you've done before. Yeah, it's so true. And the power of the comments section, especially on quote unquote viral posts, is tangible for sure.
Yeah. Well, and the other part too is, you know, if you've been on LinkedIn for any amount of time, your network is probably substantial, and you don't see every
Yeah.
post and every thread until you search. I'm
Mhm.
connected with a lot of really amazing customer leaders who have been there and done that, and they have done everything that I've tried to do. So I use that as one of my treasured tools.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The algorithm gets us though, man.
They do. Technology, huh?
Exactly. Um, I, I I love everything that you've just brought to the table because there's some really valuable nuggets in there, and I think the spirit of this whole podcast is to learn from each other as much as possible and learn as much from our failures as our or from our failures as our successes. So I appreciate you highlighting some of that as well. And speaking of kind of resources and education and whatnot, what's in your content diet, so to speak? Like what are you paying attention to when it comes to books, podcasts, YouTube, and all of that to keep yourself fresh and engaged?
Um, well, first of all, I am that nerd that always has a stack of books on my nightstand and on my desk, and I'm constantly reading. I'm always looking for books on um, different perspectives of service engagement. So I try to broaden it a little bit, not just look like for support, success things, just service interactions. I love podcasts also, and I am always listening to as a matter of fact, I stopped a podcast to doing this. But for me it's podcasts and books. I'll be honest, I haven't got much into YouTube channels. That's probably an opportunity for me, but I have a couple of books that are kind of like my go-to. I think I've shared a link with you. It has like the majority of them on there.
Yeah, and we'll put that in the show notes for sure.
And same thing with the with podcasts. I've got
Mhm.
um so I'm like threefold. I'm like a people leader, a customer leader, and I'm very operational. So I really like, there's this podcast by Heather R. Younger, Leadership with Heart. I like that. I listen
Mm,
to that a lot. um but I also like the Gain, Grow, Retain. Like, that started when the pandemic started, and I was kind of like in the beginning of that, and I still use it. They have community, they have people, kind of
yeah,
same thing, and they kind of crowdsource topics to talk about, which I think is important, because one day we're talking about churn, the next day we're talking about scale, and it doesn't matter which element you're talking about in kind of the customer success arena. We're all figuring out how to digitize as much of it as we can. So I think it's relevant. I haven't listened to a session where I've been like,
right.
and
I was talking with Jeff the other day,
oh,
and
really?
and it dawned on me, just looking at the Gain Grow Retain podcast, how much it's almost like an encyclopedia, if you will, because there is such a variety of topics on that show that you can really kind of get a taste for just about anything, customer success or really just customer related.
Yeah, I'm ready for your podcast. I'm really excited to hear what other people's elevator pitch about customer success, digital things that they're doing, because every time I think that I have done as much research to where my brain is just full of whatever, I find a conversation or content, and somehow I find something that I've not even considered.
Yeah.
And so I'm ready to listen. I'm looking forward.
Yeah, it's been interesting so far, because everybody has a different flavor and comes to the table with a different set of experiences and backgrounds and a set of challenges. There's been a couple of folks on that share a challenge that I have as well in operating in a non-SaaS on-prem environment, which is a whole another set of challenges. It's just like there's all these different angles that come to the table. So, and I entered into this with the spirit of learning as much as possible, and so I'm super stoked to share it.
I think it's a good reminder too, though, that there still is on-prem out there because everything that you see is so geared towards SaaS. It's almost like we forgot that there's another way to use software, and so I think it's a
Yeah.
good reminder of that.
It is, and I actually think that generative AI is going to push us a little bit more towards on-prem because there's a lot of data privacy concerns, and so we're going to see some local installations of you know
Yeah.
of large language models, and so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. That's for sure.
I mean, if you'd asked any of us 6, 7 years ago if we thought we'd be fully remote and doing what we're doing, not one of us would have
Hmm.
said that. So,
No way, never
like,
going to happen.
not one of us would have predicted this, not even in a million years. So, I think
Yeah,
like the anything is possible.
yeah, I totally agree. Who would you want to give some kudos to and shout out to that's doing really cool things in digital CS right now?
So I really enjoyed a vendor that I have not spent much time with until I went to Pulse, Support Logic.
Hmm.
I the one of the things that I love about support the most is the amount of data that you can get from it. Because rule number one in support, system needs to be up. Rule number two, you measure everything. And because you have so much data available to you, you're not always able to curate it, cultivate it, use it to the fullest extent. Because unless you've got a team of data analysts that can do nothing but geek out all day, and I have yet to find a peer that has that, you don't have the ability to take advantage of the data that comes out of support that you want to. We all do the same things. We look at top 10, we look at trends, things like that. But when I was walking through Support Logic's demo and they were kind of showing me a different perspective with the data, I mean, I can't lie. I wish I had more budget this year because I probably would have spent a little bit more time. But they're on my list for next year to kind of circle back a little bit once we get into that because I've got good process, good data, good utilization and decision making from service data and success data. And I've got what I consider your core foundational from support, but I'd love to see what other information I could get out of that. So I'm definitely going to explore that. And I say this just because I like tools that can take data I already have and help me make decisions, not necessarily spit out a report and then I've got to go decide what to do about it, right?
Hmm.
Things that can look at that and make recommendations, what I consider smart software that helps me drive me in a direction is really what interests me.
I would actually love your insight on something quickly because so much of the common thread that we have in tackling digital customer success problems is data. Data lies at the core of the analysis behind it and how we reach out and who we reach out to and who we engage with what content, et cetera, et cetera. Um, you have such a rich history in support and call center. I would if you were going to build out a customer scorecard with support metrics, what would you focus on? Would you be focused on obviously the classics such as ticket volume and like escalations and all that kind of stuff, or are there other kind of cheat codes that you would put into your scorecard?
That's a good question.
I put you on the spot. Sorry.
No, it's good, but it's actually something I'm talking about right now in my own business, because I'm building my health scores because we're implementing um, Gainsight.
Yeah.
So I look at it a little bit differently. First of all, I like to do a study of the customer segmentations, because I think grouping by size helps a little bit in segments, because the way an enterprise software versus an SMB engage with support is going to be different. One has an army
Mhm.
to support it. One has Joe who stops in twice a month, right? Like we have a couple of things to deal with there. So what I like to establish is kind of our baseline of communication. Obviously the first 90 days somebody goes live, it's a little bit different. When you get into what I consider stabilization or cruising altitude with your software, I want to know, like on a regular basis, how are we interacting? And so I'm not just looking for that to increase, but I'm also looking for that to decrease, because that could either be they are really getting solid in the software and they have less questions, but it could also be they're frustrated and they're not engaging anymore because
They're
that
ghosting you.
right? It's not getting them what they need. And so I look at that. I also look at the types of questions that they ask. So if we're in like the how to in the process and understanding that, then I like to come in and say, can we do some training? Can we do some supplementary there, right? How can we help answer these questions maybe at a larger scale? Can we give you some content and help you drive that, like your champion, kind of help adoption throughout the business? Um, or is it product use case that's a little bit different and outside of what we consider standard? And if that's the case, I want to get that information to product. I want product to understand the different ways our customers are using it, because there's the way you write it, the way you concept it, and then the way our customers actually use it. And so
Mm.
I'm looking at the types of questions, the way that they're engaging. Obviously, ticket volume, close rates, escalations, those are important, but I think probably less utilized is the actual use case and the types of questions they're asking, um, just as the product. Now, if I'm releasing a new feature every 6 weeks, then I'm probably always going to have how to, right? Um,
Yeah.
but I think it's digging into more the why. I'm very interested in the why. And
Yeah.
so that's what I look for kind of in health scores. It's probably a little different.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm curious because we're retooling our health score as we speak too, and one of the things I'm tackling is support metrics. So that's great to have your insight. Thank you.
Well, the thing I would tell you too is the support tickets that can't be resolved in support. So the ones that go to engineering
Mm.
or product, those are probably the critical ones, because those are the ones that you're going to find the parts of the product that the customers are struggling with the most. And if you
And
have
probably the highest predictor of churn too, I would imagine.
That's right. And if you have a customer that is like consistently finding bugs, like if you need a quality person, try to go recruit whoever's breaking your software. But yeah, no, we also track, the issues we can't solve and support, and then the resolution of those, because they definitely are indicators. If people think that enhancement requests or bugs are going to black holes at some point or another, that's going to be a discussion during renewal.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Cool. I love it. I love it. I fully recognize that I am the thing that's standing between you and time with the kids. So I think what we will probably do is wrap it up. But I really appreciate your time, and I'm glad we could. Third time's a charm. I'm glad we could make it work this time. Where can people find you and engage with you?
Oh gosh, LinkedIn is probably the best source. I am the worst about going, 2 or 3 days, and then I obsess and I'm on it like solidly. You'll see like post after post for me, and then I'm quiet for a couple days. It's a thing, but that's probably where I do the majority of learning, conversating, networking, kind of looking for things like that.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Digital Customer Success Podcast. If you like what we're doing, or don't for that matter, consider leaving us a review on your podcast platform of choice. You can view the Digital Customer Success definition word map and get more information about the show at digitalcustomersuccess.com. My name is Alex Turkovich. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time.